Namaste nerds, this is Navanad, the budget PubStomper, and today we're going to be revisiting a topic that people seem to enjoy a lot. This is going to be budget cEdh WinCons part 2, budget Bugaloo. Kind of just came up with that off the top of my head. Are you impressed? You ought to be. Alright, so if you didn't see the last video, what I basically did was I put up some, I got to my Moxfield deck lists, and I just opened up decks and I started like goldfishing out hands until I got to a win state or pretty near a win state, and then I went back to them and just kind of showed them one by one. So what I want to do is I want to show interesting combos that are different than the combos I've shown before, but I also want them to be combos that you're likely to run into or you might want to add to your deck. So not like totally one-of combos, unless the one-of combos are just real popular. So like for instance, Glinthorn Buccaneer and Malcolm, you're only going to see that in Malcolm red decks, but there's a lot of them. So that kind of got into the last video. But let's just, without further ado, let's get into it. You'll get what's going on as we move through the material here. So this is my Urza Lord Protector list, $100 budget deck. If you're not familiar with the commander, it just is it's a mana engine and a combo piece, which checks 2 of my boxes for good budget commanders. It's in 2 pretty good colors, but it says artifacts, instants, and sorcery spells. You don't have to pick one. It's not only one of them. It's all of your artifact, instant, and sorcery spells cost 1 less mana to cast. And then there's some other little bit of text at the bottom that we're not going to worry about. The main thing is this is going to turn our 2 mana interaction into 1 mana interaction, and it's going to be a mana engine and a combo piece. Like Into the Royal becomes really good at 1 mana, and you can even still kick it for 2. So for a total of 3, it's bounce that thing and draw a card, or just 1 mana bounce target thing. We've got creatures like Milliken, because at 1 mana it's not that bad of a deal. But also one of our main win cons in the deck is the reality chip. Now I just, the way I do this is I just open up these decks and I start goldfishing until I get to a win state or something close to a win state, and then I kind of go from there. And I just didn't run into the reality chip. I ran into this guy here, Crystal Skull Issue Spyglass. Okay, so what this is, it's an artifact that gives you the ability to look at the top card of your library at any time, so I suppose I should probably play with that revealed for our uses. Oh, cool. Very good. And it gives you the ability to play historic spells from the top of your library. Historic spells such as Sensei's Divining Top. Okay, so again, this guy discounts our mana value, our cast cost on artifacts, by 1, which means that Sensei's Divining Top you can cast for free. This thing allows us to play artifacts off the top of our deck, and Sensei's Divining Top, aside from being able to rearrange the top 3 cards of your library, you can just tap this, draw a card, and then put this on top of your deck. So in this situation, we're on turn 4. I don't know what I tapped 3 mana for. I tapped 3 for the skull here. This also works as a mana rock, so you can tap this for a blue mana too. It's one of the nice little upgrades that this deck recently got. I've been thinking about putting this together in paper. I think it's a really cool list. I did do a deck tech on this too. If you're interested, take a look. So Sensei's Divining Top. Here's what we're going to do. We've got our cost reducer, which is the commander. We've got our Divining Top. And we've got something that allows us to play the Divining Top from the top of the deck. And so what we'll do here, we will tap Sensei's Divining Top to draw a card and put Sensei's Divining Top on top of our library. Okay, now we're allowed to cast spells from the top of our library, and Sensei's Divining Top costs 1 less mana, so it costs 0. So we will cast this from the top of our library. We will tap it to draw a card, and we will put it back on top of our library. And we'll play it for free, and we will tap it to draw a card, and we'll put it on top of our library. You kind of see where this is going. So we've got 1, 2, 3 mana open. We can tap this to play our rock if we want to. If we need white and somebody's got white. Did we play a land this turn? It looks like we did. We could, so basically you're going to be allowed to draw your deck with this combo. And we've got a Laboratory Maniac right here. So the easiest, kind of cleanest way to win the game would be just to continue going through this loop, which is just going to draw our entire deck. And when we draw our deck out, we're going to have tons of interaction, including free interaction like misdirection, to protect ourselves. And then we are going to cast Laboratory Maniac, and then, I don't know, any cantrip. You could just cast a Ponder, Preordain, Consider, anything that causes you to draw a card. A Blink of an Eye and kick it. Or, you know, you've got tons of interaction to hold up. You can sculpt a perfect hand that's going to allow you to no way die before your next turn, or make sure you're not going to be able to lose your Lab Maniac until your next turn. And then at the beginning of your next turn, you're going to attempt to draw from an empty library and win the game. So that is a new $100 budget combo. Now let's look at, I don't know if I was actually at a win state here. This is a deck that I worked on for a friend a while back who was threatening to play budget competitive but never actually played with us. This is Kroxa Worldgorger. So the way this commander works, I mean, you can cast it for its escape. So you can cast it, and when you cast it for 2 mana, when it ETBs, your opponents each discard a card. And then if they didn't discard a land card, no, I should say, each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card this way loses 3 life. So if you could somehow arrange to be able to cast this thing infinitely over and over. So if you have infinite mana, you can cast it, let it go back to your command zone. All of your opponents discard, you cast it, let it go back to your grave or your command zone. All of your opponents discard, and when they don't have any cards left in their hand, you're just going to start actually dealing 3 damage to them on each iteration. You also have some of these lands like Shiving Gorge, where when you're doing this loop that we're about to go over, you don't even need access to your commander, and you can still use the Shiving Gorge to kill everybody. But let's talk about the loop. Let's show the loop. So let's say if this were our actual game state, we need to transmute this to find Animate Dead. I haven't played this list in a long time. I hope I have Animate Dead. So black, black, colorless to transmute. And this transmute card is a bit of grave hate, but the main reason we play it is for 3 mana. We can discard this and search our library for a 2 mana card. So we're going to find, I don't know if I've got Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead, whichever one's cheaper, or maybe both. Okay, so Animate Dead goes to hand. Okay, close and shuffle. I don't know if it makes any difference if we would have done that in the other order. Probably fine. So now we're going to cast Gamble, and we are going to hope to hell that we don't discard our Animate Dead. If we discard anything but Animate Dead, this is a win. So probably what we do even before we did all that is we'd go to combat, and this guy has the ability to basically just draw you another card if you hit somebody with them. So fill our hand up a little bit more, then cast the Gamble. And we're going to gamble for Worldgorger Dragon. So this goes to hand. And, you know, they call that gamble the Red Entomb because a lot of times it seems like the thing you tutor for you end up putting in the bin. In this case, we actually want to do that. So, you know, ideally we'll put this thing in the bin. In fact, you know what? What we need to do, we need to back that up. We can't find the Worldgorger Dragon. We have to actually go for a way to put it in the graveyard. I don't remember what I'm using to put things in the graveyard. Okay, this could let us discard and draw cards. But no, I need something that just puts it direct into the graveyard. Final Parting takes a lot of mana, but that assembles your entire combo, both pieces. What's that thing called? Unmarked Grave? There we go. Okay, so Unmarked Grave to hand. And you can also find Unmarked Grave with the Transmute card. Doesn't really matter how this went as long as we discard something that isn't unmarked grave, and animate dead. So let's just say we discard, I don't know, that guy. Now, we are going to tap two. Well, we haven't played a land yet. We're going to tap our 1, 2 to cast unmarked grave, and we're going to find the Worldgorger dragon and put it in our graveyard. This deck is a bit of a kind of a stacksy deck, by the way. So getting to turn 4 or 5 shouldn't be a problem. You've got all kinds of control elements. You've got, creature removal. You've got board wipes. You've got discard spells, stacks pieces. This is meant to go a little bit later. It's not like a turbo Worldgorger dragon deck. Okay, so here we get to turn 5, and now we use our animate dead. We cast animate dead, targeting Worldgorger dragon. Okay, so Worldgorger dragon says, when it enters the battlefield, you exile every other permanent you control. When it leaves the battlefield, return all of those cards to the battlefield under your control. So we animate dead. We tap all of our mana sources in response. Float the mana. And animate dead animates Worldgorger. When Worldgorger comes into play, it exiles all of our permanents. Well, that includes the animate dead. So now the animate dead, it's gone, and that's going to cause the Worldgorger dragon to go back into the graveyard. Well, when it goes into the graveyard, all of our things come back. And when things enter the battlefield in Magic the Gathering, unless it says otherwise on the card, you untap the thing. They come into play untapped. So now we're going to have this board state, Worldgorger back in the graveyard, but our animate dead comes back out of exile. It comes back. So it has to target something. So we're going to have it target the Worldgorger dragon. The Worldgorger dragon comes into play. In response, we're going to tap all of our mana sources, float all of this mana. Now Worldgorger dragon ETBs, and it exiles all of our things, including the animate dead. So this gets exiled temporarily, because when this thing leaves, which it will since this got exiled, all of our things come back. They come back untapped, including our animate dead looking for a target. So we choose to target Worldgorger dragon. We animate the Worldgorger dragon, and in response, we tap all of our mana sources, so on and so forth ad infinitum, until we have 10 billion red and black mana. And we're going to use our ulcerate to kill this guy. Or if somebody else has a creature in the graveyard, as long as there's any creature in the graveyard, we can stop the loop. The problem is animate dead comes into play in the middle of resolving, right? So in the process of resolving. So it has to have a target. And if you can't target some other creature, you have to continually target the Worldgorger dragon. And so if you don't have another creature in a graveyard to target, then this just ends the game in a draw. It just loops infinitely. But in this case, we murdered our guy, or we murdered somebody else's guy ideally. And then after we've got 1 billion mana, the last time this thing falls off, then we animate dead targeting this thing here to some creature that isn't Worldgorger. Okay, now we've got 10 billion black and 10 billion red mana. We're going to cast Kroxa. Our opponents will all discard a card, and if they don't discard a non-land card, so that means if they discard a land or if they discard nothing, if they don't have anything to discard, it deals 3 damage. They pay 3 life. So this goes into the command zone. We have infinite mana. We cast it again. We didn't escape it, so it dies, but we choose to put it back in the command zone. We cast it again. It dies into the command zone. We cast it again. It dies into the command zone. And we do that over and over until our opponents are hellbent. They have no cards in hand. And once they're hellbent, and they're supposed to be discarding cards, this Kroxa is going to force them to pay 3 life. It says, whenever Kroxa enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card. then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card this way loses 3 life. So because they don't have any cards left after the first, whatever, 7 iterations, they can't discard anything that stops them from losing 3 life. So every time we cast this after they're out of cards, they just have to pay 3 life. And so we just do that over and over until everybody is very, very dead. So this is the Worldgorger Dragon loop. The Worldgorger Dragon loop works with Animate Dead, Necromancy, and Dance of the Dead. You need to have an enchantment that comes into play and targets the Worldgorger that'll start this kind of perpetual loop where all of your things get exiled in and out of existence, and you can tap the mana sources while that's going on in between iterations and make infinite mana. And so really any red-black commander that has an infinite mana payoff that can win the game if it were cast enough times, and basically any commander that's in the color identities of black and red, at least black and red, if it has a mana sink, that if you have infinite mana it will win the game, any commander or commander pair like that can take advantage of the Animate Dead Worldgorger Dragon thing. You could use Jessica and Armix. That's another one that I built. Probably a little bit better than this deck, honestly. The Armix and Jessica is a partner pair. The Armix allows you to discard the Worldgorger Dragon. It's just what the commander does. You can discard a card to to remove a creature, basically. So if you can tutor the Worldgorger Dragon into your hand, you can put it in the graveyard. And then Jessica is an infinite mana outlet, and they're in black and red. But we showed it to you in Kroxa because it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit cooler. A little bit, it's not the norm, Speaking of not the norm, this is a weird deck. And I'm actually pretty proud of this one because I built this. I didn't just build the $100 version of it myself. I actually came up with this combo line that I've never seen anybody else use in competitive and budget competitive, or even in any of these Elias, il-Kor, Sadistic Pilgrim decks. Now there are lots of ways to murder the table with this commander. What it does, it's a 2/2 Death Touch for a black and a white. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. And whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So there's lots of ways to take advantage of this. You can use what they call the Shroedingers Cat. There's even some new combos. But the one I want to showcase here is Enduring Renewal. So Enduring Renewal says you play with the cards in your hand face up on the table. If you draw a creature card from your library, discard it. Whenever a creature goes into your graveyard from play, put that creature into your hand. Okay, so basically anytime one of your creatures dies, when this is in play, it goes back into your hand. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to tap a mana to crack our Wishclaw Talisman. We'll give that to somebody and we'll tutor. I don't remember which ones I'm using, but here's an example. Any of these will work. Any of these creatures that have X cast cost and they enter as XX creatures, like Stonecoil Serpent, Walking Ballista, though it's kind of out of our budget range for this deck. Anything that you can, basically pay 0 and it will enter the battlefield as a 0 mana creature, a 0 toughness creature, and then immediately die, will work with this combo. So we've got Enduring Renewal out. We just found our Ugin's Conjurant. This thing is a 0/0, and its cast cost is X, and whatever X is, that's how big it is. So you can we could pay the 3 mana and turn it into a 3/3. We're not going to do that though. If you haven't figured it out, we are going to cast this for 0 mana. It's a creature, it comes into play, it dies to state-based actions, goes into the graveyard, and the Sadistic Pilgrim says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, we gain a life, so we gain a life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, so we ping each opponent, we drain each opponent basically. We're gaining life, and we're pinging our opponents down. Now, Enduring Renewal says that whenever creature card dies, whenever a creature card goes to your graveyard from play, that creature goes back into your hand. So this did interplay. It died. It comes back into our hand. We cast it for 0 again. It dies. It comes back into our hand. We pay 0. It dies. Comes back into our hand. Each time we do this, we're gaining life and we're pinging our opponents each for 1 damage, which just ends the game. I have some other combos in here. Maybe we'll go over one more, but that's the Enduring Renewal. I've never seen anybody play this card. I thought this was a cool chance to play it. It does stop you from playing Lurrus as your companion with Elas il-Kor. So, I mean, you could debate whether it's worth it or not. There are plenty of combos that work with this commander. I came up with this one. I like it. It's not the hardest thing to find. You've got transmute cards for 4. You've got tutors for enchantments. So I decided to roll with this. You could take this out. You could put Lurrus in your companion zone. And you could do some of the other combos. I'm going to show one. Like I said, I'm going to show one more. So let's say instead of paying the 1 to activate our Wish Claw, we paid 1, 2, 3, and cast Buried Alive. We're going to search our library for... Oh, I thought it was Auriok Salvagers. What is that guy called? Leonin. There it is. We're searching for Leonin Relic Warder. We're going to put that into the graveyard. You'd put some other stuff in the graveyard too, especially if you have Lurrus. But we're not going to worry about that. We're not going to a next turn. We also have to find, in this case... let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have not played a land. We also have to tutor for an animate spell. Okay, so now we're going to tap the Wish Claw, pass it off, and find any of the Worldgorger dragon type spells. This loop is very similar to that. So Animate Dead goes to our hand. We pay our 2 mana. We cast Animate Dead. We target Leonin Relic Warder. When Leonin Relic Warder enters the battlefield, you may exile target artifact or enchantment. When Leonin Relic Warder leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So does this sound familiar? We are going to... So we cast the Animate Dead on the Leonin Relic Warder. It comes into play. When it comes into play, we're going to choose for the Leonic Relic Warder to target the Animate Dead. So the Animate Dead will go to exile. And this guy's going to die because it's no longer got an Animate Dead on it. So this guy dies, but when it dies, the thing that it exiled comes back into play. Our Animate Dead comes back into play. We find a target for it, Leonin Relic Warder. This exiles that. This goes back into the graveyard. This comes back. We target this with it, just like the Worldgorger Dragon loop. This says when Leonic Relic Warder enters the battlefield, you may exile a thing. And you can exile other things. It doesn't have to be the Animate Dead. So this one isn't quite as finicky. We don't actually need to have another creature to target to stop it from just ending the game in an infinite loop. We don't have to target anything at all. Or we can use it when it... So we... if it's not clear, this thing is pinging everybody to death still, right? Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you gain a life. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So it comes into play, exiles the Animate Dead. It dies. When it dies, this pings everybody for 1. This comes back, targeting this. When this enters, we gain a life, and we have it exile the Animate Dead. It goes into the graveyard. Everybody takes a damage from our commander. So on and so forth ad nauseum. We don't have to find a way to... I think I was saying we don't have to find a way to end the loop. We can just choose not to exile the Animate Dead on the last time the Leonin Relic Warder comes into play. I did find Lurrus was good enough to be in the 99. I mean, if for no other reason than it gives us backup ways to win with these guys. But there's more to it than that. And being that we do have enough synergy in the deck to run Lurrus, it may well be the better play to stick him in your companion zone and maybe don't play the Enduring Renewal combo. I'm kind of fond of it. Back when I built this deck a long time ago, years ago, like whenever this thing first came out, there wasn't there weren't, some of the combos that you can use now did not exist. But we've got other combos. You can do another one you lose access to if you run Lurrus in your companion zone, is you don't get the White Worldgorger Dragon. The White Worldgorger Dragon is... How are we doing on time here, guys? Not bad. 25 minutes, 56 seconds. Not bad. The white here it is. Abdel Adrian. This thing, I guess basically without spending 10 more minutes talking about this deck, this is a fill-in for Worldgorger Dragon. Now the difference here is when this guy enters the battlefield, you can exile any number of non-land permanents you control. So it doesn't exile all of your lands the way Worldgorger Dragon does. So you would have to have a couple of rocks. You need to have a couple of mana rocks in play to get this one to work. I swear there are mana rocks in the deck. So we'd have to have that. Okay, so instead of Enduring Renewal, instead of Leonin Relic Warder, let's say that we used Buried Alive to put Abdel Adrian in the graveyard. We've got Animate Dead in hand. We tap our 2 mana. We cast Animate Dead. This comes into the battlefield, and we choose to exile these two and this. And so this gets exiled. This goes into the graveyard. These come back. This targets that. And we're doing the same exact thing we did with the Worldgorger Dragon, but now we're taking advantage of the text on our commander. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. And we're pinging the table down with our Abdel Adrian line. We've got one more. Oh, so this one I actually did not have a deck for. I just kind of... I've got this... this Moxfield, I don't even know what to call it, list, just called budget combos, and I stick a bunch of the budget combo cards in there so that I can show show combos when I do one of these cool videos, for instance, right? Okay, so here we're at the, just say hypothetically, we're at the end of turn 3. Our last opponent passes to us. We've got a Reckless Fireweaver in play. We're going to flash in Valley Floodcaller. Valley Floodcaller says you may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. And it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control get +1/+1 until end of turn and untap them. Okay, now we're going to go to our turn. And we are going to cast Banishing Knack. Targeting the Valley Floodcaller, Banishing Knack says until end of turn, target creature gains tap to return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So now, every time for the rest of the turn, we'd like to tap this guy. I don't want it to tap that direction. Whenever we want to tap this guy, not this guy, whenever we want to tap this, it will bounce target thing. Okay, so that's in the graveyard. Then we're going to cast our 0 mana rock. This is Jeweled Amulet. It doesn't really matter what it does. It costs 0 mana. And then we're going to tap the Valley Floodcaller using the Banishing Knack ability to bounce this to hand. And then we're going to cast it again. Remember the bottom part of the text here says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control, untap and get +1/+1. So we cast a we cast a non-creature spell, so this untaps. Okay, now we're going to tap it, bounce this to our hand because of the Banishing Knack ability. There's actually 2 versions of this also. There's Something Helix and Banishing Knack. They're mechanically the same identical card. So we cast this, untaps this, tap this to bounce this, so on and so forth. Well, Reckless Fireweaver here says, whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. So every time we go through this iteration, we are pinging everybody for 1 damage with our Reckless Fireweaver. So this might be a card or a combo you'd consider for Niv Mizzet, the new Niv Mizzet Prune. Or any of your commanders that are in the right colors and are an infinite mana outlet. If you use a mana positive rock when you're going through this loop, you can make infinite mana. But in budget, it's probably better if you find something that doesn't need you to go mana positive. Where we were talking about this on the Discord last night was in regards to Glarb, which is a deck tech I also did, but probably I need to redo it. This Valley Floodcaller is huge in that deck because Glarb is a frog, and therefore every time you go through this Valley Floodcaller loop with Glarb, you're able to untap Glarb and use its tap ability over and over and over. You can use that to mill yourself out. We put Narcomoeba in the deck, and just creatures that when you mill them, either you can cast them from the graveyard or they just come into play automatically. We've got a handful of those, like creatures that have Unearth, whatever. And then there's an animation spell. Can never remember the name of it. It's not Unburial Rites, but that's all I can ever think of. There's an animation effect, a reanimate type thing, that has flashback of sacrifice 3 creatures. And so you've got Valley Floodcaller, you've got Glarb, you mill over Narcomoeba, you unearth your Stitcher, Fate Stitcher. In any case, you maybe have some dorks in play, and then you mill yourself out with a Glarb using this Valley Floodcaller combo, and then you sacrifice some creatures to flashback a Thassa's Oracle or a Laboratory Maniac or whatever. Something that just says that, in that deck, if we have enough mana, which a lot of times when you're going through the Valley Floodcaller loop, you'll be making infinite mana. Like, for instance, if you have Birds of Paradise in play along with the Valley Floodcaller, that's also a bird, so you can tap that and make mana. Or if instead of Jeweled Amulet, you're using Soul Ring, that'll make you infinite mana. And there's other ways. There's a piece of equipment. I can never remember the name of that either. It's 0 mana. It's kind of like a Springleaf Drum. You can equip it to something, and then it has the ability to tap for a mana. You can put that thing on anything that's a bird, otter, or whatever else this thing says, a bird, frog, otter, or a rat. And then it becomes like your Birds of Paradise. You make infinite mana. And then maybe you use the Glarb to mill yourself all out, except for you leave Lab Jace, the Jace that wins the game, like Laboratory Maniac. You leave that on the top of your deck. With Glarb, you can play spells off the top of your deck that are 4 mana. So you'd play it, activate it, win the game. So there's lots of ways to use Valley Floodcaller. You can use it to make infinite mana. It also makes whatever bird, frog, otter, and rats that you're getting involved in the situation. It gives them infinite power, which you can use that to smash people, or there's other ways to use that. You can beef them up real high and then use a draw equal to power spell. But this is a really important combo in Commander, especially in cEdh, but maybe especially in budget. Like, this is, I think, in contention for one of the best combos in our $100 max competitive Commander format. And why would that be? Well, the reasons for that is there's tons of redundancy. Like, if you're doing this Reckless Fireweaver type stuff, there's like 6 of these guys. You're not going to run out of versions of it that you might want to play. And the Valley Floodcaller is relatively easy to tutor. Even in budget, you've got some reasonable creature tutors. You've got things that transmute for 3. There's one in black. There's one in blue. So it's not the hardest thing to find. And all of your mana neutral, it doesn't have to be a rock, just your mana neutral artifacts can all go off with this guy. And the really neat thing is this combo is using cards that you probably want to be playing in a lot of decks anyway. That's the main thing. Like, Valley Floodcaller is just a really powerful effect, so this is the thing. even if the combo did not exist, if there weren't Banishing Knack and the other version, which again, it's got redundancy, and it's not the hardest thing to tutor. It's an instant, so you can tutor it pretty easily in blue. Well, and it's 1 mana, so you can use the 1 mana transmute to find it also. But even if this didn't exist, even if you didn't have Retraction Helix, I think is the other one, or Banishing Knack, Valley Floodcaller is still just a really good card. Being able to cast spells at instant speed, I mean, it's kind of, I would say this, I would say the better you get at Competitive Commander, the better that ability is going to seem to you. If you're a poker player, it's like position in poker. It's very much the same. In position, when you have position, when you act after everybody else, you know what everybody else is going to do before you have to decide what you're going to do, which might seem like a small thing. It's gargantuan. You take like a decent poker player, even myself, I honestly would doubt that there's a poker player on the planet, literally, who could beat me 1v1 if they let me have the dealer button all night. I think it would be almost impossible. That's how big of a deal it is. That's the same thing as flash speed, instant speed. And however bad you are at poker, if you got the button all night, so if you got to be in position on me for the entirety of for a 4-hour session, there's just no way I can beat you. I mean, if you have the slightest clue, it's just impossible. Because you're acting with information, and it's a game about incomplete information. That's the same thing with Magic the Gathering. You don't know who's going to try to win. You don't know if they're going to be successful. So if you're sitting there with a WinCons, but you're like, man, there's 3 blue players and 2 of them are fully untapped. How do you know whether you should go or not? Well, you don't, right? Well, as soon as one player tries to go off, and it looks like, oh, wow, they're just going to sit there and watch him, nobody's going to stop him, then you can go off on top of him. So you can, with your Valley, you can flash out the Valley Floodcaller, and then whatever your A+B combo is, just flash the A+B combo and win the game once you know the coast is clear. Or if there's a big interaction battle where everybody's trying to counter everybody's stuff, and then somebody runs out and somebody sticks a very important piece, and you're sure that everybody's out of interaction and tapped out maybe, you can flash in your Valley Floodcaller and you can win the game when it's convenient for you. When it's best for you. Like a lot of times when you're playing Competitive Commander with a good, proactive combo deck, you're looking for a window, an opportunity to appear. Well, when you have Valley Floodcaller, you're not looking for a window. You're deciding when to kick the door in. You're creating a window. So that's the thing. Like, this combo is good. It's got a lot of redundancy, so on, but it is usually going to require 3 pieces. So that's not ideal. The thing is, there's no deck building cost to running these pieces. You're going to have some 0-drop stuff or mana positive stuff in your deck, things that you want to play. And in a lot of decks, you're going to have ways to pay off just casting a bunch of spells, artifacts entering the battlefield, or infinite mana. So I guess I have wasted enough of your precious time. I think that's going to do it for today, for this edition of How to Murder Your Opponents for $100 or Less, Budget Combos 2, Budget Bugaloo. Until next time, word to your mothers and your fathers, word to your daughters, word to your sons. I never word to your sons, and I'm sorry about that. I feel really deeply bad about that. Word to your sons. May the Force be with you, especially the dark side of the Force. That's kind of a mean thing to say. I didn't mean that. Until next time, guys. Namaste, nerds.